In today's video, I'm going to walk you through step by step how I design my native cottage gardens and everything that goes into the planning of landscape projects like this. Hey guys, it's Anna from Bright Lane Gardens. I'm coming to you from my office today, so this is a little different. I won't be touching any plants today, but I am going to review with you the process that I use to design my native garden plots or my cottage garden design. Today, all we need is a couple markers, a piece of paper, and a general idea of what plants we have to work with to plan out our native garden plot. So this is a picture of the plot that we're working with today, and I'm only going to really plan out one section of this plot. This is a larger area of our yard. We call it the welcome pond because it's near the entrance to our property. And as you can see, there is a pond in the background. In the middle here, it kind of ends up being an 18 by 18 foot square. This is the primary part that we're going to plan out on paper today. This is also bordered by a driveway or a walkway. So there's actually going to be two visual access points for this plot. One is going to be from across the pond, which would be the top of this image looking into the middle of this image. And the second is going to be from the driveway or the walkway, which is going to be from the bottom of this image looking up towards the middle of this image. These are a couple inspiration photos of the cottage garden design that I love and utilize around my property. I have found that this cottage garden design is a really great option if you want to landscape with taller, more wild-esque native plants. So if you're looking for a way to have a nice and neat and clean aesthetic, this is probably not going to be the design that you're looking for. So there's very little mulch involved. There's very little hardscaping outside of your pathways. The idea behind a cottage garden is big, bold colors. We're talking about large clusters of the same color plant. And we like a lot of repeating colors and repeating patterns. For today's color scheme, we're really gonna work a lot with purples and blues, but I'm gonna highlight a couple yellows and oranges in there too, just to make those pop. We're also going to incorporate native grasses and other plants that maybe aren't flower forward, but have some different textures or different shades of green to offer. And we also, of course, want to keep the environment in mind. So I'm going to pick a couple milkweeds to help the monarch population. The native grasses, again, can provide essential habitat for a lot of our native insects as well. And I definitely want to get a lot of pollinator-friendly plants out there. Now, with this cottage garden type design, you can work with a lot of taller plants, which are harder to work with when you're working with a really well-groomed, well-manicured landscape design. So when you're thinking of a row of hydrangeas that are nicely separated and nicely pruned with 3 feet of mulch in between each hydrangea, that's kind of what I'm referring to when I mean a really highly manicured, nicely maintained landscape. Those are beautiful. I don't have anything against them outside of the fact that they're just not quite as beneficial to the ecosystem as a native garden would be. We can still work with those, but today's video is really going to be about that cottage garden vibe. So this is a much lower maintenance approach to landscaping, a lot of repeating colors, a lot of repeating patterns, and nice full growth with very little visible ground between each plant. So essentially the idea is we start with just a few plants. They're going to be native plants, so they'll grow in really nicely, and they're going to clump out and develop into these nice, bold clusters that really grow in so thickly that there's not a lot of weeds and outside growth that can pop up in between. That's the idea behind the design that we're going to be developing today. Our first step is going to be really just sketching out a basic idea of the shape of what we want it to look like. So let's head on over to our sketch table. We're going to use a grid sheet of paper that represents an approximate size, scaled down, of course, of our landscaped area. And after that, we'll go ahead and pick out some of our favorite plants that we're going to include in our design. Before we move on to the design process in this video, if you are new to native plants, first and foremost, welcome. It's a super fun and exciting journey, but above all, it's exceptionally rewarding, and it, of course, is beneficial to our ecosystem. This video might be a little overwhelming if you're brand new to native plants. A lot of these plants are going to sound a little foreign to you, but maybe you've heard of some of them as well. I'll include photos of every plant that I mentioned so that you can refer back to this video if needed. And I'm also going to link out to an article that will include a full list of the plants that I used, along with images of those plants, bloom times, growing conditions, etc. So all the information that you need, I want to provide in this video, but please don't hesitate to head on over to my native plant playlist, where I have a lot of beginner-friendly videos that'll help give you a more broad introduction into the world of native gardening. Without further ado, let's head on over and get started on designing our native plot. The very first step that I take anytime I'm designing a landscape section is to sketch out the basic design of what I want the shape of it to look like. I, of course, have plants in mind, like I mentioned earlier in the video, of what I want to put out there. But before I even put together my final plant list, I'm actually going to go ahead and sketch out the way I want my basic design to look. So for the simplicity of this video, I split that area that I showed you earlier in the video into basically a square, and then there will be kind of an elongated section here that goes in front of that pond section. But for today, we're just going to focus on this square, and it was about 18 by 17 and a half. So we'll call it 18 by 18. I did sketch out some really light grids on here. Basically every ½ inch would notate a foot. So each square is 1 square foot. It just gives me a better idea of how many plants I'm going to need to fill out the space I've designated for those plants. For orientation purposes, the top part of this paper here, this is actually that rounded edge of the pond. So there's a little stone edging right here. And of course, this will be visible from this section of the pond. So anyone walking along this side of the pond would be viewing it from this direction. The bottom edge of the paper here is where the driveway is, which is kind of another walkway. So the way I'm looking at this plot here is the focal point is coming from the top part of the paper and the bottom part of the paper, making the center of my plot right in the middle here. Now keep in mind, we have the magnolia tree off to the left here that's going to provide decent shade for this top corner. So I'm going to keep that in mind when it comes to selecting my plants. Now, of course, this might be a first draft and it might be a final draft. We never know where we're at until we're finished with it. So I'm going to start sketching out just a basic idea of where I want some of my clusters of plants to go. It's okay if I have some specific plants in mind to designate for certain areas, but really my goal at this first step is just to get the shape down. So I'm going to go ahead and start sketching a couple things. I'll make little notes about features that I like to include anytime I'm sketching out a drawing like this. Okay, so I have my basic sketch done. It's very likely that this is going to change form at a certain point. Obviously, it's very roughly done, but I have a general idea of what I want this landscape to look like. So in the center, we're going to start here. This is going to be considered our focal point because we're looking from this direction and from this direction. So our eyes are going to fall on this section regardless of if we're looking from this direction or this direction. These plants here are going to be my tallest plants. So probably like my New England Aster that I'm going to throw in there, and Coneflower can get up there in height. These guys are going to be my tallest plants here. A couple other features that I want to point out. You might notice there's some larger sections that really aren't clumping. So this section here, this section here, this section here. These I like to dedicate to grasses anytime I can. So I'm going to choose a lower grass for both of these corners. Something that's easy to look over and something that really isn't going to steal the spotlight from some of the more colorful plants behind it. Grasses are so valuable when it comes to landscaping. I personally don't think that they're used enough. I think they add a lot of fun texture without taking away a lot of that wow factor that you can get from your colorful plants. So I really encourage the use of native grasses. They also are a great host plant for a lot of different native insects. They can provide shelter, they can provide food. They're just a wonderful plant all the way around. So I'll rattle off those two grasses that I'm going to use. Another feature that you might notice, some of these circles have gaps in between them where they don't overlap. And these sections here are really ideal for like a statement plant that you're only going to plant 1 or 2 of, compass plant, cup plant, gray-headed coneflower, even my big bluestem grass. So all of those taller statement type plants that you're not going to plant an entire cluster of, that's where they can be added into a diagram like this. A lot of the circular clusters that you see on here, these are going to be used by flowering, perennial, herbaceous native plants. My Culver's root, Hoary Vervain, my coneflowers, my traditional coneflower, purple coneflower, any of those types of plants are going to go really well in these clusters. Planting them in larger clusters like that is going to make those blooms pop. So I'm super excited about that. So now that I have the basic design and layout identified that I want to use, I'm going to go ahead and finalize my plant list and add it to the side of the page here. So it's very unlikely that I'm going to use all of these plants on this list, but these are the available plants to me that I know I will go well in this section here. I'm going to start with my hardest to fill sections because those plant types are going to be a lot more specific. Let's start with the magnolia tree area here. Since this section is likely to get the most amount of shade, I know that my Pye Weed here can handle that shade and still offer some really lovely blooms. So Pye Weed is absolutely what's going to end up here. That's probably going to be the only spot that I have Pye Weed. It can be a very large and overpowering plant. I might try to add a small section of it in here if I have the space for it. But other than that, it's okay that he just exists in that one little area there. A few more of the specialty ones. Let's go up to the Clethra here. This is a native shrub. The variety that I have is called Ruby Spice. So it has a really nice, pretty bloom to it. Anytime I'm working with a shrub, I typically like to have my shrubs on the edges here. So I'm actually going to commit this section over here to my Clethra, and I might have a little bit of extra room there as well, since this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 feet. So I certainly don't need an entire 6 feet for that. So we'll put Clethra. Another honorable mention is going to be my big bluestem grass. This grass can get up to 7 feet tall. So we're talking about a massive patch of grass. This is definitely one that I'm going to want to utilize one of these special areas for. And I think I might pick this right here. So we'll define big bluestem with just a triangle since there's not enough room to add that there. I'll add a B just so we know what we're talking about. If I have another section, I might add one more of those, but anytime you've got a plant that's reaching 6, 7 feet tall, just use it sparingly. It won't take much for those to really overpower your cottage garden. Another very tall one is going to be my gray-headed coneflower. It's actually a yellow coneflower. It does have a yellow colored flower to it. They call it a gray-headed coneflower. And this guy can also get up to 5 feet tall, so I really only want a small patch of this one as well. And I think I'd like to do this section right here. So I'm going to say gray-headed cone. And we will color code all of these a little bit later just so that it's easier to pick up on those. And then lastly, our New England Aster. That's going to be another really, really tall plant, but I would like to have at least 2 sections of this New England Aster. It would go really well right in between these two. So I'm thinking this is a perfect spot here. And probably this spot right here. I'm gonna put a star there. That might be an honorable mention. I don't know on that one. So the other areas that I want to focus on first are going to be my lower areas because I want this section here and this section here to be lower so that it's easier for anyone walking by from my 2 focal points to see these plants in the middle. So we don't want to put our lowest plants in the middle because they'll be blocked out by the taller plants on the edges. So now I really used the lowest plants kind of at the beginning of the list and went taller as we went down here. So lavender, nodding iris, blue iris, and purple prairie clover, purple lovegrass, and then the sedge are going to be some of my shorter plants here. I do want to do a grass up here, so I'm going to use this for my purple lovegrass. And then I'm actually going to match that over here with purple lovegrass as well. And these stay nice and low. Purple lovegrass really only gets up to 18 inches at most, and it does a really good job of kind of fluffing out. It adds a lot of fun texture to it. It starts blooming relatively early in July. That's a little earlier for grasses, and it just gets these really pretty seed heads on them that do have a purple hue to them. That's where that name comes from. So since I'm using my purple lovegrass there, I'm likely going to cancel out my sedge at this point because I've already got my big bluestem grass here. I've got purple lovegrass there, so I don't think I want to add any other grasses unless there's an oddball area that I want to fill in with something. So we'll leave that there. Next, let's fill in some of our other shorter areas here. I like blue iris because blue iris is going to be a spring bloomer. So is my purple Prairie Phlox. So Prairie Phlox and Blue Iris are both going to be spring bloomers, which means I don't want them right next to each other, but I do want them close to the front of either side. So let's select this area here for my Blue Iris. I'm going to hold off on it right here for a second. I might end up doing it back here actually. So Blue Iris, Blue Iris. I think I'm going to reserve this section back here. I do have a nodding wild onion that I want to throw in there, and then I also have some lavender that I was eager to toss in there. So I'm going to do lavender here. Now, nodding wild onion is not like the other alliums. It actually blooms a little bit later. It's more of a July through August. Lavender is going to be earlier in the season. This will be later in the season. I do want to add my Prairie Phlox here because that's my early bloomer. And then again, down here, I want to definitely do Prairie Phlox here. And I'll probably end up doing my nodding onion there. Let's start to fill in the middle and we'll see. Next, I do want to add in some white. So a lot of these colors are blues and purples. Purple, 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 blue, purpley pink, blue, blue. So now I really want to add some white. White cannot be overdone in a garden typically. So blues are like really common, especially in the native plant world that we love. And I love to break that up with some whites. So my Whorled Milkweed is the only white flower that I have on here, and I want to make sure that I'm repeating that twice. So I'm actually going to probably do one right in the front here. And I'm going to repeat that one again, probably back here. Next, I want to make sure that my Blazing Star makes it in here. Blazing Star is going to be really tall, really big. It's going to have a nice statement to it. So I want to make these actually be a little bit of smaller patches. So this right here is going to be one of my Blazing Stars. And then I'll hold off for now, but I'm likely going to try to corner off another area over here for another section of Blazing Star. Hoary Vervain is probably one of my favorite plants on this list. It has a stunning purple column of flowers that blooms right around this time, June through September. They're in full bloom right now. They really catch your eye and they're just very striking. So I certainly don't want to miss out on that. The New England Aster is going to be such a tall bloomer that I'm going to do Hoary Vervain here, and I'm going to repeat it again here. My Coneflower is certainly not one that I want to miss out on. Coneflower does want that full sun, so I do need to kind of keep them out in this section here. And I think I might need to split up some of these actually. So we'll do our purple coneflower there, and I think we'll go ahead and repeat it again right here. So what I want to look for now is, are we repeating some of these sections enough? Gray-headed cone, I want to repeat again right here, just to make sure that they have a couple appearances. Again, the blue stem, I'm not positive that I'm going to repeat that one. It's just such a large plant. I'm going to do a large section of Blazing Star right here. Blazing Star is full sun to partial, so I do think it'll fare out just fine over there. If it seems to be struggling at all, I'll probably try to move some of the cones a little further this way and replace something else there, maybe my Whorled Milkweed. But I do want to give it a shot. So I've got a Blazing Star here and a Blazing Star here. Both are going to be very tall plants, but the stems are nice and dainty, so they really don't block too much behind. They almost just kind of add a colorful foreground to your backdrop there. I have two more primary areas that I'm looking to fill in, and I'm already repeating a decent amount, so I'm really happy with that. I am tempted to do another Clethra up here just because I can prune it to kind of fit a certain size or space. I'm actually going to swap my coneflower here and my New England Aster. I'm going to put an additional Clethra here. Okay, one last switch. I'm going to actually move this purple coneflower up here, and I'm going to move my nodding wild onion here. All right, this by no means looks perfect, but I've got a really good idea of what I want my final product to look like. So now that I have all of this in play, I am going to go ahead and draw up a final draft of this. So reviewing a couple notes that we talked about earlier in the video pertaining to this design. So I'm keeping a lot of my flowering plants in these nice circular clumps. They don't have to be exact, they don't have to be perfect, but keeping them in a circle enables them to kind of clump out, which is what they would want to do naturally. So this is going to result in a little bit of a lower maintenance garden for you later on because you're not trying to control the overall shape of the plant. I have few and far between are going to be my really big statement pieces. So my gray-headed coneflower that can get up to 5 feet there, my big bluestem grass here, my blazing star here and here. I'm trying not to overdo some of these larger plants in here. Otherwise they'll really take over the aesthetic of what I'm trying to put together. I have a lot of my taller clumping plants in the middle here, and they kind of cascade shorter as they get out to the focal points on each side. I did add 2 shrubs, Clethra and Clethra. I don't typically put a shrub right in the middle here. The reason I felt comfortable doing this is these 2 plants here are so low that it's going to be easy for me to come in here and help maintain this spot here. It also does give these plants a little bit more space to kind of fill in there, and I have a nice little gray-headed coneflower over here. The pink with the yellow I think will really pop. I did try to adjust the plants to mix them up so that they're all blooming at different times. So we have a couple of our spring bloomers, Blue Wild Iris and our Prairie Phlox here, Blue Wild Iris here. So these are nice and spread out throughout. A lot of these plants are still going to be blooming in June for any native garden. Typically June is going to be your big bloom time, so everything through the center here is going to be blooming in June. And then I have a couple of my later fall bloomers that is going to be Pye Weed, the grasses, your big bluestem grass, and coneflower, and my New England Aster will also be blooming in the fall. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to draw it up in a much nicer format, and then we'll go ahead and color code everything. Okay, I do have my finalized design here. Color coding it really does help some of these stand out. So I did do a big change from the last draft that you guys saw here, and that was adding the butterfly weed in orange. Once you start color coding things, it kind of draws your attention to any repeating colors that are repeating maybe a couple too many times. So I had so much purple going on. I did remove the lavender up here, replace it with butterfly weed, and incorporated that 2 more times after that. As you can see, almost everything repeats at least once. So again, that's a really common trend in cottage gardens, is that repeating pattern of clusters of flowers. A big exception is going to be my New England Aster does not repeat, and that is just because it's such a tall plant and it demands so much attention that I didn't want that to overpower this area too much. And as you notice, I put it smack dab in the middle there, so it's really not going to block your view from seeing anything else. A couple other notes, these 2, the Clethras, these are shrubs. These are not going to be clusters of flowers, but 2 individual shrubs, so there's a chance that right here I might be able to fill in with something else. I did add my gray-headed coneflower. That's going to be the yellow highlighter here and here. Those are going to be really tall and they're going to really pop. This green section here is likely going to be 2 of my big bluestem grasses side by side. It's going to add a lot of really nice texture to that area, and it really won't reach full height until at least late summer. I didn't draw my grid lines on this sheet of paper here. I just like the final colored version to look really clean. I am going to use this as reference. So every single one of these squares indicates about 1 square foot. Anytime you're dealing with a cottage garden like this, you never want to deal in exact measurements, but it's great to have a rough estimate. So like my purple love grass at its widest point is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 feet wide. So that's quite a few plants there. Just something of note when you draw out your grid lines, this really helps you identify how many plants you're going to need. In similar format, you can see my cluster of New England Aster is about 1, 2, 3 feet wide at its widest point, and probably 4 feet long at its widest point. So this is going to be a really nice size cluster there as well. This is the end of the design process for me. My next step is actually to go out and use spray paint to draw a rough outline of what this will look like on my actual plot. So in a separate video, I'm going to show you my preparation process for that. I already have the plot prepped, ready to go. The soil has been tilled up. I removed most of the weed growth there. So I am ready to plant, but there's a couple initial planting processes that I do like to do first to ensure that I have success in laying out my design. That's all I have for the design part of my video today. I know it's so strange to have a video about landscaping that doesn't involve any plants at all, but I just wanted to show you my design process and how I think through a lot of my cottage garden designs. It's so tempting to just grab your plants and toss them in the ground, but with just a couple minutes of planning beforehand on a sheet of paper, a lot of times you can bring your visualization to life in a much more accurate way than if you just put the plants straight in the ground. So of course we did the planning process today, but my next video is going to walk through the preparation process for my site and of course the planting of my plants. So if you want to watch me bring this project project to life, definitely subscribe to our channel and set up your alerts so that you know when the next videos launch. I sure appreciate you spending time on our channel today. It seriously helps out small businesses like ours so much. Thank you so much for tuning into this video, and I sure hope to catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.